grace is sufficient for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me. My God shall supply all my needs according to his riches in glory. He will give his angels charge over me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me. My God shall supply all my needs according to his riches in glory. He will give his angels charge over me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me. My God shall supply all my needs, hey, 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 according to his riches in glory. Hey, he shall give his angels charge over me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me. One more time. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me. My God shall supply all my needs, hey, 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 according to his riches in glory. Hey, he shall give his angels charge over me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me. Jehovah Jireh cares for me. Amen. All right.
All right. Well, good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday night. It's bittersweet. It is sweet because we get to study God's word and once again learn some amazing and interesting things from Rabbi Adam Mayer, but it is bitter because this is the last Wednesday that we're going to be doing this in this series. So it's been a really, really enriching time. It's been really encouraging, I think, and informative. You know, I feel like I've just learned a lot more about the Bible, a lot more about very particular stories in the Old Testament. And, I'm just so grateful to the elders for just, allowing us and, particularly Jim Albert, his idea, put it on this to do something like this. And then God just moved and we met the rabbi and, whether from Sinaholic, like cinnamon, not sin, like we're not addicted to sin, right? But like Sinaholic, from that time we met and just ate. That was just such a rich time through now. It's been a really incredible journey, and just really excited at the fact that as a church we were able to do this. So so we got our last night. We're gonna be talking about the Day of Atonement tonight. I don't really have any announcements other than May is our Hands of Christ month at Duluth Co-op. So in the bulletin, you've got the sign-up sheet. Again, you can sign up for shifts 1 to 2 hours and just go serve our community. So please check that out. Sign up. It's, take a half day or take a long lunch. Take your family. It's a really, really great opportunity. I've done it for several years, and it is now May. So, so we should go ahead and sign up and get that going. So, without further ado, wanted to invite Rabbi Don back up to take the stage, and let's dig into our Bibles. And if you didn't get a handout, they're out there in the lobby. So, amen. Let's welcome him.
you, everybody. It's great to be back here again. And to echo Fenton's words, it's been a great pleasure for me, too, to come and learn together. So thank you for having me. Wonderful. So today we're going to be looking at the Day of Atonement, which was the request, and to dig into what that service was. And I want to begin from the place of the human experience, where we humans have both this need deep inside of us to be close to God and to take a step back at the same time. And this is perhaps Abraham is the one who embodies this. Maybe not first, but he embodies it very well. Maybe before him as well, there were some. But Abraham, who is known as the one who loves God and is tested on Mount Moriah, and at the end of the test, which was the song you were singing, I think, is from the Binding of Isaac, right? That's that name of God. That's that Abraham says, right? God will be seen, is right. So there, Abraham leaves that experience with this, it says, now I have seen that Abraham has a fear of God, right? So there's this balance of love and fear, right? Of the need to be close and God pulling us in and drawing us near, and at the same time, this perhaps like knowledge or feeling or reaction that if you get too close, right, then I'm shocked, Brad, right? I jump back for a second, right? So we have this love and fear of God. And so we've seen this with Abraham, maybe even earlier with Noah. There's right? We're not going to get into that today. But we see it come to, a national level at Mount Sinai, right? Where when the Ten Commandments are given there on Mount Sinai, Moses draws near and everyone else, stays back. And there's a border around the mountain, and then the whole process of the receiving of Torah and the receiving of God's word is how do we draw it into our hearts, and how do we then build this tabernacle of a place to make God's presence known and felt in this world. Right? So that's the context of where we are, and we want to be as close as we can to God, but every time we get close, it is with this tremendous sense of awe and fear, and we need to take a step back. So that's the tension, which is at the core of the service of the Day of Atonement, right? Of how do we be with God, right? And there's a verse from Isaiah. Seek God where He is found. Yeshu be'ato karov, and I don't remember the whole verse, but seek God where He is found, and call out to Him where when He is close. I think it's in 55, where there is where is God not found? When is God not close? Right, but it is that sense of feeling close sometimes lets us seek God. Right, and feeling far, right, might make it a little bit more difficult in the moment. So that's all part of this experience that I've had, and I know many of us have had of this kind of religious draw towards God, but sometimes needing to take a step back. And there is a real danger that we see in the Tanakh, in the stories of the Bible. There's a real danger of getting too close. And that's where it is. So the Israelites in the desert, they build the tabernacle, and according to all of the instructions at the end of Exodus, and there's the opening ceremonies of the tabernacle, where there's a whole 7-day preparation, and when all of the vessels are arrayed out in their proper places and anointed, and everything is going to plan, and then there are sacrifices that are given, and there's a celebration and on that day. So that's where we're beginning in Leviticus chapter 10. And in this celebration, right, Moses and Aaron are the two leaders, officiants in the ceremony. And we meet two of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, and they don't have a role to play. They're not really part of the ceremony, but they want to be, right? They want to come really close to God, but they don't have a role to play. Maybe they weren't invited, maybe it was a two-man job, maybe who knows what. But they weren't instructed by God to be doing anything. So what happens? Now Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before God alien fire, which had not been enjoined upon them. Right? So that fire pans is like a dustpan, but made out of metal that can hold burning coals. And you sprinkle incense on them, and they burn. And so they take this, and they bring it into the sanctuary, into the Holy of Holies. Then fire came forth from God and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of God. And if you look carefully, right, there's right in the verses right around here, the description of, and then fire came down from God, those words appear twice in this, talking about this scene from two different angles. When Moses is giving his sacrifice, it says, then fire came down from God and burnt the sacrifice. And when Nadav and Avihu are giving, then fire came down from God. And I think the simple reading is, this is the way that the Bible is able to tell one event from two perspectives, but it's actually happening at the same time, right? Because it doesn't do like, oh, and then, it doesn't go like the movies do. So this is the same time where the inaugural sacrifices of the tabernacle are being accepted by God and consumed by the fire, and that fire is coming down. And while that's happening, Nadav and Avihu are in the Holy of Holies with their fire pans doing this service, which was not requested by God, and they are consumed with the same fire. And so they died. And then Moses said to Aaron, this is what God meant by saying, through those near me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. Right? Bikrovaya Kadesh. That there is something about drawing near to God and this holiness that consumes, right? Which is the normal way of fire, right? Is that it consumes. Only the burning bush, right, wasn't consumed, but that was a wonder. Everything that draws near to the fire of divine fire is consumed, and that's how it works. And there is something holy about that, right? The sacrifices are consumed by fire. That's the metaphor for how God eats, metaphorically, of course. But it is this consuming fire, and there is something holy in there, and that shows, right, and gain glory before all the people. There is something about glory and splendor that makes you take a step back. Right? You don't just run, I've never met a real king, but I have imagined, right? You don't just like run up and give him a hug unless you're the prince, right? But everyone else, like you walk into the room very carefully, right? Story of Esther, right? Like if you go into the king's palace and you're not invited, right? Off with his head, you could say. You never know. But right, the king, so there is that caution that we see here, and Aaron is he's silent, right? These are his two sons. He doesn't have any verbal response right here. Right? So this is the story that is very much in the experience of Aaron every single time he comes close from now on. Right? And every high priest from Aaron onwards, every time they go into the Holy of Holies, or every time they go into the sanctuary, right? This story is in the back of their head of like, if I do this wrong, right, or if I come in uninvited, or if I veer from what I'm instructed to do, right, these are very serious consequences. Right? So has to be in the back of our mind before we can understand and appreciate the services of Yom Kippur, of the Day of Atonement. Okay, so we're going to skip ahead to chapter 16, where the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they drew near before the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. But in this way Aaron shall come into the holy place, with a bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall put the holy linen coat, and shall have linen undergarments, and he shall tie the linen sash around his waist, and the turban and the garments, and he shall bathe his body, and he shall take from the congregation of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Right, so here, 5 chapters later, we get kind of the aftermath. The inauguration ceremony was completed, and we now have instruction of like, right, you can't do this. You can't, this is not, your office where you can just walk in, this is not the high priest's office. This is the Holy of Holies. And even Aaron, the high priest, is only allowed to come in 1 day a year after, in the proper clothes, in the proper ceremonial, in the ritual, right, with the baths and everything going on. And this 1 day of the year where he is supposed to come in and serve and perform this ritual is the Day of Atonement, right, which we'll get to. Aaron will cast 2 lots over the goats, in verse 8. 1 lot for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel, which we'll get to in a second. Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord and use it as a sin offering, but the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness. Right? So there are lots are like, picking straws, right? Picking a number out of the hat. So they made this box that was exactly the size of 2 hands, and he would like put his hands in, and he'd pull out the 2, and 1 would say for God, and 1 would say for Azazel, and whichever one went. And if his right hand was the one for God, that was considered to be extra good news. So they say. But that's how it was, right? So he takes them out, and right, this one goes on this goat, this one goes on this goat, whichever it is. One of the goats is offered as a sacrifice to God, and the other is sent to this Azazel, the wilderness. Right? So it seems most of the commentaries understand that this is a place, the name of a specific place in the hills of Jerusalem that's nearby, some miles away. Rashi, who's the famous medieval biblical commentator, who is steeped in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century midrashic teachings, he says that this is the word Azazel is a compound word of Az, which is strong, and El, which is mighty, which is this strong, a precipitous and flinty rock. A towering peak, right? So this is a particular hill in the Jerusalem landscape where there is this outcrop of something, and you can walk up there, and that's where the goat is brought, and then eventually he's killed off over there, which we'll get to. There are other explanations of this word Azazel that it's some kind of demon or demonic kind of spirit that needs to be distracted while the services are going on. That is out there. I don't know much about that, and I'm not going to get into that tonight, but if it exists, and because of that, somehow, right, in modern Hebrew, it's a kind of curse word, sort of like, oh, go to Azazel. It's get it. But it has that ring to anyone who knows Hebrew, of oh, that's a bad place. You don't want to go there. Right? But you don't. I mean, the goat didn't want to go there, but right. Right. So that's what happens, and we'll get to that goat, but that goat is then kind of released into the wild, but not here you go free. It's pushed off a cliff and killed into the wild. Yeah, I mean, it's a different kind of sacrifice, right? One is sacrificed in the Holy of Holies and the blood sprinkled, etc., and the other is pushed off a cliff. But different. Right? Okay. So, but that's what's going on there. Okay. Okay. So let's go through the rest of the part from Leviticus, and So no one may be in the tent of meeting from the time he enters to make atonement in the holy place until he comes out and has made atonement for himself and for his house and for all of the assembly of Israel. So we're back in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem in the temple. The high priest is there. He's followed the ritual to the letter. He spends time in the Holy of Holies making atonement, right? And this is the Day of Atonement, kapara, right? Which is like covering over of the sins. The same word is the word used that is where little baby Moses' basket is covered in tar and whatever, right? That's the same word of kapara, of the way that it's like covered and sealed. So like we want our sins to get like covered and not seen at all. And so he's making atonement for himself and for his family and for the people of Israel. And in verse 20, when he has made an end of atoning for the holy place and the tent of meeting and the altar, he shall present the live goat, and he lays his hands on the goat and confesses over it all the iniquities, all the sins, right, of the people of Israel, all their transgressions, all their sins, and he puts them onto the goat and sends it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man who is in readiness. The goat shall bear all the iniquities on itself to a remote area, and he shall let the goat go free in the wilderness. And skipping ahead, right, you can read the whole chapter there, but it didn't fit onto, I didn't want to make it too long. Right? But this shall be a statute for you forever in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, and you shall afflict yourselves and shall do no work, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. He shall make atonement for the holy sanctuary. He shall make atonement for the tent of meeting and for the altar, and he shall make atonement for the priests and for all the people of the assembly. And thus we have the Day of Atonement. Okay, and this is, right, atonement for the people, and also there is a way that's described here how the people's sins kind of pile up on the temple itself. So that's part of make atonement for the sanctuary and make atonement for the tent of meeting. Right, these holy places kind of hold some of the sins of the people as well. So he's kind of making purifying and sanctifying, re-sanctifying, right, the place and the people together. And today, this is known, the Day of Atonement, in Hebrew is known as Yom Kippur, or Yom Kippur with an accent, which will happen, in the spring month, usually around September, right, in the seventh month of starting from the month of spring. Is in the Bible. They count from spring as the first month. So the 7th month gets us off in September or so. And today, right, it is a day of, right, we don't have the service, but we try to keep verse 29 as much as possible. Afflict yourselves and do no work. Right, so afflict yourselves, it's a fast day where we don't eat or drink for 24 hours. We don't wash our bodies, and we don't wear comfortable shoes, right? In many ways, we don't do all of the things that make us human. And some more modern commentaries have said, well, like we almost rise to the level of angels on this day. We stop doing the things that make us human, which is also the things that lead us to sin. And so we rise above that. We stop being humans for a day and rise to the levels of angels. Angels can't sin, right? So if we can spend a day not sinning, right, that's how to affect this atonement. So we spend the day in prayer. We spend the day not engaging in most physical activity. So that's kind of the day as it is today. Okay, but we're not going to focus so much on the modern practices of Yom Kippur. We're going to look back at the temple service. And in the liturgy today of Yom Kippur, this sections of the Mishnah that we're about to read are actually recited as here is like what we used to do, but reading the service, and someone asked me about this last month. Reading the service is a way of kind of honoring and almost reliving it, since we can't relive it, right? So by reading the service, it's as if we were able to do it, which is one of the ways that prayer can function. Okay, so what we're going to get into, right, in the Holy of Holies on page 2, is so what's happening in the Holy of Holies, and then what's happening with the goats as they leave. So these are the two elements of the service, of the ritual that is done in Jerusalem, or that was done in Jerusalem in the times of the temple. Right, so this is 2,000 years ago and hasn't happened in the last, since the destruction of the temple. Good. Okay, so all of the chapters of Mishnah Yoma go through the whole service of Yom Kippur, from a week ahead of time, of preparing the priest and preparing a backup priest in case something goes wrong, and preparing a third backup just in case, right? They don't want anything to go wrong because we know what can happen if something goes wrong. But we're starting already in chapter 5, and this is already, the priest is good, and we're on the Day of Atonement itself. He reaches the opening to the north. He enters the Holy of Holies. Through that opening, he turns his face to the south, and he walks to his left along the curtain until he reaches the area before the ark. When he reaches the ark, he places the coal pan between the two staves. He piles the incense atop the coals, and the whole chamber in its entirety would fill with smoke. He then exits and comes out the way he entered. He does not turn around, but leaves the Holy of Holies walking while facing the ark, right, like backing out. And he recites a brief prayer in the outer chamber in the sanctuary. And he would not extend his prayer there, so as not to alarm the Jewish people, who would otherwise conclude that something happened and that he died in the Holy of Holies. Right, so everyone is still really scared and nervous about this. There's even some versions where like he walks in with a rope around his leg in case you have to pull him out, like if he dies, because no one else would want to go in there and take him out either. So like they're really, really concerned. Like this is the palpable fear of the day, of if you get too close to God, you can die. But at the same time, we all need to be close to God. Right, so we have to do it, right? And you can see how, like, right, go this way, turn this way, face this way, walk, like detailed, step by step by step. Which, if we think about it, like we're not high priests, but we can adopt some of this kind of meticulous practice, even on a very small level, in our own worship and in our own practice, right? Well, even if it's like I have my book and I wrap it in a special cloth, and then I open the cloth and open the book, right? Even like a 3-step ritual, but there is something in that prepares us, and that gives us the validity of like, okay, I'm doing a service right now. I'm performing, right, in service of God. And having such detailed instructions, even if for ourselves, even if we make them up, but they bring our consciousness and our intention into our service, right? That's something we might be able to learn from this service of the priest. And so the priest, he's not, and while he's in there, he can't spend too much time. And here they brought a story in the little box here, the Tosefta. There was an incident. So this is told later, but around the same time period. There was an incident involving a high priest who did extend his prayer. And his fellow priests took a vote, and they counted, and they decided to go in after him out of concern that he had died, or fainted, or that he required assistance. They began to enter, but at that moment he emerged. Phew, right? They didn't say that, but that's in there, right? They said to him, "Why did you take so long? Like we were about to send a rescue team after you, And he said to them, "Why not? Does it trouble you that I was praying for the temple not to be destroyed?" Like he was doing his job. He was praying for everything to happen. They said to him, "Don't make a habit of doing so." As we learned, right, he would not extend his prayer, not to alarm the Jewish people. So even there, right, even though in general we know that, yes, you want to spend the time pouring out your heart and praying to God, and take your time in your prayer if that's helpful. But here in this moment, it's not the time for freestyle going off on your own, right? Do that after you leave, right? These incidents, right, they continue to happen, right? But so after the service was completed, the people escorted him, the priest, right, the high priest, to his house in deference, and the high priest would make a feast for all his loved ones and friends when he emerged in peace from the sanctuary, right? So it was a big, coming out alive meant that the service was done properly, right? Hooray! And afterwards, right, atonement was received, right? It was, right? We did our job, we did our service, we have returned to the Lord, and now it is time for a celebration, right? So that's the service of happening in the Holy of Holies, right? So for the high priest, that's his experience of the day, and this probably takes him, from the morning until, 3 or 4 in the afternoon. He's working all day to do this. He has to go in the bath every single time and change his clothes, and right, it's a big process. Okay. So on the one hand, right, that's the side of the service. And for the people living in this time, this is all, the priest doing it, right? The people around are, they hear. There is a part of the service that the people are involved in, where the priest would, when he came out, he would say a prayer, and this is the one time the whole year where he would say God's name, Yud He Vav He, and he'd pronounce it, and everyone in the entire courtyard would like bow down. But that's the only participation of the masses. And this is all kind of priestly service. So that's going on in the Holy of Holies, and the people on the outside, see him go in, and then see him come out, and that's it, right? So it's kind of affected from afar. The goats, right? So remember, he takes 2 goats, and one of them is sacrificed in the Holy of Holies, right? And done. And the second one is sent out. So the one that is sent out, that is seen by all the people, and that's actually, perhaps, in my imagination at least, is where the people kind of associate more of the service of what happens, right, with what they can see. Right? So they know something's happening in the Holy of Holies, but then they see kind of this goat going out into the desert, and that's where more of the action, at least that they can see, is happening. And they tell the whole story here, which we'll see, of how this happens. So there is this mitzvah, the commandment of 2 Yom Kippur goats. The goat sacrificed to God, and the goat sent to Azazel, and this is how it works. As follows, ab anitio, which means ideally, initially, right? Here's how it's supposed to happen. Right? And I took out all the contingencies of if it can't happen for our study tonight. We're just going to read how it's supposed to happen. But it goes on, it cuts out 3 paragraphs of if this happens, and if this happens, and if this happens, and if this happens, because they want to make sure it's done right. But the way it's supposed to happen is that both goats are supposed to be identical in appearance, and in height, and in monetary value, and that their acquisition should be as one, like bought together as a pair. The high priest comes over to the scapegoat, right? So the one who is to be sent away. And he places his hands on it, and he confesses, and he would say as follows: Please God, your people, the house of Israel, have sinned, and they have done wrong, and they have rebelled against you. Please God, grant atonement for their sins, for their wrongs, for the rebellions that they have sinned and done wrong and rebelled before you, your people, the house of Israel, as is written in the Torah of Moses, your servant, saying, On this day of atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you of all your sins before the Lord, you shall be purified. And the priest and the people standing in the temple courtyard would then hear the explicit name emerging from the mouth of the high priest, when the high priest did not use one of the substitute names for God. Then they would kneel and prostrate themselves and fall on their face and say, Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. And so this is the one time a year that they hear the name of God pronounced by the high priest. Then people from among the prominent residents of Jerusalem would escort the person leading the goat until they reached the first booth. And booths were set up along the path to the wilderness to provide the escort a place to rest. At each and every booth, people would say, Here, have some food, have some water if you need it. And they escort him from booth to booth, except the last person at the last booth, who does not reach the cliff with him. Rather, he stands from a distance and observes his actions to ensure that he fulfills the mitzvah properly, the service. Right? And some say this is as long as 9 miles out of Jerusalem. Right? So this is a guy like running a half marathon. Right? So there's booths set up along the way, and everyone's like, you want food? You want water? Come on, you can do it. Right? They're cheering him along the whole way. It may have been a little shorter than that. Right? It might have been, maybe it was just a 10-mile run. But still, right? It's a distance out, right? So it's strenuous. Okay, and he gets there, and the guy in the last, right, so he's there, the guy, our runner, and on the edge of the cliff. And what did the one designated to dispatch the goat do there? He divided a strip of crimson into 2 parts, and he tied the strip to the rock, and the other half he tied between the two horns of the goat. And he pushed the goat backward, and it would roll and descend down the mountain. And it would not reach halfway down the mountain before it was torn limb from limb. The one designated to dispatch the goat came and sat under the roof of the last booth until it would grow dark, and then went home. Right, so this is the goat who gets tied to a rock and thrown off the cliff. Right, so it's a sacrifice. Right, this is where all of our sins are, and in his sacrifice there, one sacrifice out in the wilderness that kind of goes into nowhere or nothing in our minds, and the other one in the temple with the proper slaughter and sprinklings and all of the service that they did there. And the last paragraph on this page, the high priest passed the goat to the man tasked with dispatching the goat. He came to the next bull and the goat that were to be burned, and he performs a service. And they say to the high priest, right, so they bring the message back to the high priest, the goat has reached the wilderness. And how did they know? Rabbi Yishmael says, right, that the crimson tied to the entrance of the sanctuary, and when the goat reached the wilderness and the mitzvah was fulfilled, the strip would turn white. So the same cloth of crimson that was tied around the goat's horns and the stone, there was another piece of crimson tied, a strand of string or something like that, tied in the Holy of Holies that would turn white, and that was the magical sign that all of the sins were forgiven, right? And there's verses, if your sins are as red as crimson, I will make them as white as snow, right? There's a few different iterations of that, but that's actually happening at this service, right? According to how it's told. Okay, so that happens, and that's where there's a whole escort of people along the way. And here, right, what is this mountain? So these sages in the Babylonian Talmud, this is already year 500, 600 or so. They're living in Babylonia, which is like near Baghdad, Iran area, excuse me. So they haven't ever been to Jerusalem, but they are telling what they have heard from generations past, and they're trying to put together all the information that they've heard from different sources to recreate and to imagine what it was actually like. So they taught that the word Azazel indicates that the cliff the goat was pushed from should be rough and hard. And I might have thought that it would be located in a settled area, but no, it says specifically, the verse states, in the wilderness. Right? And how do we know that the goat gets pushed off of this cliff? And the verse in 1622 states, Gezeira, which is right, indicating that the area is sharp like a cliff. And it was taught in another teaching, another Braita, that Azazel is a reference to the hardest mountain. Right? So they're trying, they have this tradition that this was some kind of place, and they're trying to make it make sense. But this is already, we see how even a few centuries later, they're trying to piece together what was. Right? We've lost this service as a service, and we have it now only as a story. And as a story, then it is almost an invitation for us to enter into the story and make it our own as a way of worship. That isn't necessarily bound to, here's exactly the way that it had to happen, right? We're no longer the priests who have to take every single step with the utmost caution. And now this kind of opens itself up to a story that we can become any character in that story we want as part of our service and our worship. And so we see kind of this, we see that direction here in this last source, where and this is Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is midrashic from the time of the Mishnah, right, 1st, 2nd century, and this is quoted by a medieval commentator. This is where I found. Anyway, he explains more clearly in the chapters of Rabbi Eliezer the reason why they would give. So here, remember, he is going along what I mentioned earlier, that this place of Azazel, like this cliff, is some reference to demonic powers. So he's kind of going, nodding to that understanding of this area, right? So the reason why they would give, Samael or Satan or this demonic power, this goat as a conciliatory gift on the Day of Atonement was so that he should not annul the effect of their offerings. As it is said, one lot goes to the eternal God, and the other to Azazel. The lot of the Holy One, blessed be he, to be a burnt offering, and the lot of Azazel to be the goat of sin, bearing upon it all the iniquities of Israel. Right? So it seems like, it's not going to be this way, but it seems like they're presenting this as there are two powers, right? One of the goats goes to God, and the other goes to this demonic power. And the goat shall bear the iniquities of them. When Samael, the demonic power, saw that he could find no sin on the Day of Atonement among the children of Israel, he said to them, Master of the worlds, you have one people on earth who are incomparable to the ministering angels in heavens. Just as the ministering angels are barefoot, so are the Israelites barefoot, right, on the Day of Atonement. Right, and that's one of the ways that we, of the day of affliction, right, we don't wear comfortable shoes. So back in the day, that just meant not wearing shoes. Right, so which makes sense. So that's what the Israelites were doing, right, and here he's comparing them. Just as the ministering angels were barefoot, so the Israelites are barefoot on the Day of Atonement. Just as the angels don't eat or drink, so there is no eating or drinking in Israel on the Day of Atonement. Just as the angels have no joints in their feet and therefore cannot sit or lie down, so do the Israelites stand on their feet in the Day of Atonement. Just as there is peace in the midst of the angels, so do the Israelites bring peace among themselves on the Day of Atonement. And just as the angels are free from all sin, so are the Israelites free from sin on the Day of Atonement. All right, this is the conversation, as it were, right, between these sides. And the Holy One, blessed be he, hears the testimony concerning Israel from the prosecutor, and he, God, atones for the altar and for the sanctuary and for the priests and for all the people of the assembly. As it said, he shall make atonement for the most holy place. Right. So there's different kind of narratives of what's going on here, and different centuries of theology and kind of understanding the balance of powers here. Either way, or both ways, I guess. I like to see this multiplicity of, like, what's this service happening, that all of these are kind of happening at the same time, or they're all viable kind of ways that add to my experience of of service on the Day of Atonement, right? Which, we don't have the temple, right? This isn't a service that anyone, in the last 2,000 years has been able to actually see. But it is a service that many people, and that is part of the liturgy of what are we praying on Yom Kippur, right? How do we hold this, I want to be close to God, right? I want to do anything that I can do, or everything in my power to have, to kind of achieve atonement, for my sins to be forgiven, so that I can return to God, right? And this idea of return is, that's one of the main words associated with the Day of Atonement, right? Is returning to God, as leaving the path of sin and returning to the path of righteousness. And it's called a return because at our core, right, we are created in the image of God, and at our core there is that holiness inside of us. So any time that we do go astray, and it happens to us all, there is always a potential for return. And sometimes it means splitting things up, right? And like the goats, where some of the service goes over here and some of it, gets thrown out. and that could be through past behaviors that we've done, right? Or like we want to kind of get rid of our sins. And it also could be, right, sometimes kind of giving the other of understanding is like giving the dog a bone so that he doesn't bother you anymore, right? That's another way of kind of seeing this demonic side of it sometimes right? But without saying, right, we can't say, and the Rambam and the Midrash and none of we don't hold in the Jewish faith at least that there's two powers, right? And I'm not a Christian theologist, and I don't know the theology of Satan in the Christian faith. But from the best of my understanding, right, it's still like one God and one power over everything. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of nods. Okay, good. Right? So with that, I am then challenged with like, how do I take this kind of demonic interpretation of the Day of Atonement and make it part of the way I understand kind of myself, and that can be through kind of understanding. Okay, I have the way in our Jewish tradition we have the Yetzer, we have the drive, the inclination, right? Which which human is created with this drive and of desire, and that splits to desires for good and desires for otherwise, but from the same source, right? Of I desire things, period. Right? Some of those things are very good, right? Some of them are very healthy. Some of them are not, or some of them are kind of masked, right? And then lead down a way towards unhealthy results, even though it may have started with a good. Right? So in that regard, that's how I am able to understand these kind of the interpretation of demonic forces. That they are things that sometimes we need to actually give attention to, right? That sometimes you block them out and you throw them off a cliff, and that works sometimes for some things and for some people, right? Sometimes, right? I don't know, quitting cold turkey kind of approach, and sometimes the approach is different. Of like, no, I need to actually sit down and figure out, like, I have this recurring desire to I don't know, eat not healthy foods, right? And I know better, and I try hard, but it doesn't always work, right? And you can replace that with anything you want, and it doesn't work to just like throw it off a cliff, because it's not for me. I don't know. At least it's not sustainable. For some people in different circumstances, it might be. But the way of this last way of looking at it, of like, okay, let me like. This is kind of a nod towards that desire that we have. Then it acknowledges it, and I say, okay, I will eat. If it's food that we're doing, right? I will eat a little bit, right, and satisfy that, but that's it, right? And that then becomes enough that the rest of me, which then becomes the whole me, can say, this part of myself I have satisfied enough, right? And now I'm able to see this whole picture and say, I am clear of sin, right? Because at its core, the desire, right, before it splits to desire for good and desire for bad, is only a desire for God at its core. And those things, right, and that's what drives us to want to be with God, right? It is that basic human need, that we have needs. We have desires, and they all come from, I desire to be with God. Right? But that gets expressed in a whole multiplicity of ways, some of which lead towards negative consequences. But if you come back to it at its source, and that's why the idea of return is so critical here to atonement, that if you come back to its source, right, and before they split, there is just a desire to be with God. And that's where we're returning to, and that's kind of at the core of the service of the Day of Atonement. So I'd like to have, right. So yeah, we should have a prayer for that we can connect back to that core desire to be with God, and that leads us in directions of goodness and peace.
So if you've got questions, just raise your hand, and there we go. We can get your questions asked, and then be done by 8:15 to go grab your kids, right? So who's got some questions? All right. Coco.
Is there any record when the priest did die inside the Holy of Holies, and what were the circumstances, if there were?
That's a good question.
Not that I know of. I'd have to look. Not that I know of. That's good. Yeah, it is, right. Nadav and Avihu was enough, right? Yeah, I think, right, sometimes that one initial traumatic experience is enough forever. But I can double check, but not that come to mind.
Okay. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, Shannon.
So I know fasting from food and drink is typical and common, but like today's, with people having different health things, like, is there an alternative for them, or is it like considered negative for them to not fast from food or drink if they have a medical reason or some reason that they can't?
Sure. Someone, right, on the way we practice Yom Kippur today, if you have a serious condition that you can't fast, then there are ways of eating very small amounts, very small quantities of food spread out over the day that is preferable to all out eating. If you can, like, if you need a bite and then you can fast the rest of the day, that also is good. Some people need food to take medicine, right? Yes, there's that is all considered and no, right? The guiding principle is also from a verse in Leviticus, is these are the commandments, live by them, v'chai b'hem. And all of the commandments and all of the service of God is only for life and in support of life. So any time that a commandment might threaten your life or someone else's life, the life comes first, and that's not like, oh, well, you're doing the sin, but you get to live. It's the opposite. Like, that's not even a commandment in this situation, to that extreme. And another category that falls under your comment is pregnant women. They're given they're given the kind of exception, even on Yom Kippur, that if a pregnant woman says, I need to eat this food, right, you give it to her. No questions asked, Yeah.
I know you're appreciating that right now, Jessica. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, yeah. Oh, since I'm close, I'll go to the ears and I'll come around.
So question is, according to the Torah and Deuteronomy 4:2, not adding or taking away from the scriptures to the law, how can a faithful Jew hold to Leviticus 16 and make sure that we don't add or take away from the scriptures, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Exactly. Since we can't fulfill it, but how can we hold to the scripture, hold to Leviticus 16, even though we can't hold to Leviticus 16?
Right. So there is a general law of a person is not allowed to add to or to take away from the divine commandments. And then we also know that we have a living tradition that evolves with time, and there are things which are added and there are things which kind of fall by the wayside. So the way that it's understood is within a particular commandment, that can't be added to or taken away from. For example, on the holiday of Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, there are 4 species that you're supposed to take and celebrate with. And so adding a 5th, not allowed. Having 3, not allowed. That's adding or taking away from, right? But if there were circumstances where you couldn't get your hands on those 4 species to celebrate, that doesn't count as taking away from. That's like, it's out of my hands. I don't have the possibility to do so. So not having a temple anymore doesn't negate it. It means we can't do it, but it's not against it. Right? So adding a 3rd goat would be no. right? But the fact that we can't do the service at all, right, that's kind of out of our hands. Does that answer your question? That's how it's generally understood. Yeah.
Rabbi Adam, just thank you again. I'm really fascinated about your comment on that we're drawn to God, and yet we have this rightful fear, respect. I'm curious about the backstory, the training, the understanding of how there's a name we just don't say except for one time per year. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming the community, the Israelites, are not saying this name independently. How is the rabbi? How is the training done to where you know the name? What is the transference of that information so that I can prepare somebody so they don't mess up once they're inside the Holy of Holies?
Good question.
Right. So there. First of all, today that tradition is lost, and we don't have a tradition for how to say the name, and we have substituted the word Adonai for the four-letter name of God, which we cannot pronounce, which we don't know how to pronounce even. And Adonai means my master. So today, it's lost for good. But back in the days, right, it was passed down only, within the priestly tradition. So I'm sure the priests would be around the high priest when he would say it, and they would hear it, and then they would know. But that would be kind of the context of it, and that's it. Yeah. And I guess because of that, it has been lost because it wasn't widely known, and it was kind of always kind of feared and kind of veered away from. Yeah.
Jared.
So I actually wanted to go back to the situation with Nadab and Abihu, because you had spoken a little bit about the idea of the intentions that they had, like,
Yes.
How did they approach God? And I wanted to kind of, I guess, differentiate that from the idea of this alien fire that they used when they were approaching God, and what that really meant, and if there's any ties to that idea. And I forgot what verse it was, but that situation where the Ark of the Covenant was being moved and it was falling down, and then Uzzah tried to stop it from falling. If there's any parallels there as well, because we don't get an idea of the intentionality from the standpoint of knowing what's in his heart, but it seemed like a reasonable thing to try to do.
Yes.
But obviously it didn't work out well for him. So just want to kind of get your thoughts about that.
Right. So I didn't bring Uzzah, but there's another story where they're bringing the ark to Jerusalem in the days of King David, and one of the wheels, it's like being drawn by a cart, with oxen and on a cart with wheels, and it hits a bump and it looks like it's going to fall, and Uzzah tries to catch it and he falls down dead. That's the story from Samuel. And so also another time of someone getting too close, but the intention behind it. So there's at least three different ways of trying to understand Nadav and Avihu, of what they were doing. Some of them are favorable and some of them are not. The ones that are not favorable say, we are going to take over after Moses and Aaron, so we better get in right now. And that was a lack of respect to their teachers and their father and uncle, and that was kind of one like a punishment. That's kind of the worst mindset. Another one is kind of more like Uzzah of, a sorry mistake, where they're like, well, here's the sacrifice. I know how these things work. They need fire. Oh, I've got a great idea. I'll bring fire, right? So they were trying to be helpful and innovative, but not where it was requested. And turns out, like, I'm trying to help, but I ended up getting in the way. So that's a little bit more of a naive read. And there is also a very positive read of they came in with this like unbridled desire to be close to God, and they didn't have that sense of fear to stop them, and they just went all the way in, and kind of gave themselves up like that. And that came from a place of like the deepest devotion that anyone could have. They couldn't continue to live after that, but that's where it came. So we have the whole spectrum of like, rebelling against the leadership to kind of an innocent, confused trying to help, and kind of devotion. They're all there, so you can pick whichever one you like best. Yeah, and I think Uzzah would fall under the second category of like trying to help but not, yeah.
Byron's gonna, yeah. So Byron's gonna get our last question, but afterwards I'm sure he'll be able to hang around and answer any questions directly. And so yeah, after we're done, if you have kids upstairs, please go grab them. And before I give Byron's last question, again, just want to give a big thank you to Rabbi Adam, and just the last couple months have been amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you so much for coming and encouraging us. But yes, Byron, you've got the last word, Mr. Word.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. First, I wanted to thank you for coming and teaching us. And this is a little bit off topic as far as the Day of Atonement, but it's more about Hebrew. As far as the term Shalom Chavarim, can you explain that a little bit to us as far as what that means, and maybe just kind of the spirit of that?
Yeah, sure. That it means hello, friends. But the shalom is a hello, peace, like a peaceful hello. But hello, friends, is what it means.
Okay.
There's like an old Israeli folk song of it. So it's like, that's a phrase that people sing. Shalom chaverim, shalom chaverim, shalom. But I don't know where that song is not like religious at its. I mean, it just means hello, friends. It might be a kindergarten song, or something like that just like got popular.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so we just want to take an opportunity to thank you.
Yeah.
And say goodbye, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Shalom Havarim, Shalom Havarim, Shalom, Shalom, Lehitraot, Lehitraot, Shalom, Shalom. Goodbye, my friend, be safe, my friend, have peace, till we meet again, have peace, Goodbye, my friend, be safe, my friend, have peace, till we meet again, have peace, Shalom Havarim, Shalom Havarim, Shalom, Shalom, Lehitraot, Lehitraot, Shalom, Shalom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's going to conclude our service for the evening. Ken, do you mind saying a quick prayer for us, and we will be done.
Let's all bow our heads and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and thank you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Go grab your kids.